everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of Beyond the Alert. Today, I'm speaking with Tyler Martin, Senior Director of Enterprise Security Engineering and Operations at FanDuel. Tyler, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Would love if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been in security as a practitioner for longer than I would like to admit. It's actually a funny story how I got into security. I was just really, really bad at being a developer. But ultimately, I found my way into security and really sort of haven't looked back since. I think the last 10 years or so been predominantly in healthcare with focus on startups. So being the first security hire, building out the engineering function as well as some of the GRC components that sit alongside security, and had the great opportunity to join FanDuel about 2 years ago, and I'm loving it.
Awesome. And what's going on in the shelf behind you? I have to ask.
Star Wars nerd, fan, whatever you want to label me as, I'm fine with it. Yeah, we had to have Darth Vader on the top there. He wouldn't actually fit in any of the shelves themselves. He's too big, but I figured it was appropriate to have him at the top. And bonus points, if anybody can put in the comments wherever this ends up, what that helmet is right there. So true test of the fans out there. We'll see who can get it right.
We'll not give it away. Thanks for sharing. All right, let's dive in. So what's the biggest security myth that keeps you up at night in the sports betting industry?
Oof. That's probably this actually has nothing to do with security. I hope that's okay. Probably that it's either rigged or some sort of unfair advantage, or, combination with it's not regulated, there's no controls for it. I think of us almost as a bank. Coming from healthcare, I find it very, very similar in the sense of, we have many, many different types of regulation. And actually, we are heavily regulated and heavily scrutinized on all things on our products and all of our platforms.
Like the analogy. So how does your military background as a U.S. Navy veteran shape your approach to enterprise security leadership?
It's actually told me a lot of what I need to do differently, right? So what works, in the military and sort of the way that they have discipline and just sort of the operating model, there are some, I would say, similarities in it, but there's also a lot that isn't. Case in point, you hire folks in the military, you train them, and then it's just constant, repetition. We do a lot of that. But also, I think where I vary a little bit is once we hire and put the emphasis on getting the right folks, getting them up to speed. As a leader, I like to get out of their way and just trust them to do their job, because that's what they were hired to do. Obviously, support and guide where needed, but as long as we have that repetition and operational readiness, I trust them to be able to do what they were hired to do.
It's always surprising to me when leaders end up micromanaging or being in the weeds. Like, it defeats the whole purpose, right?
It defeats the entire purpose.
Your team level. Right. Interesting. And so how does securing a sports betting platform differ from other industries?
I would say it's, coming from healthcare, we'll use that, right? We saw, if you just look at the amount of scale or traffic, it's predominantly around open enrollment, right? There's some things here and there, but you typically have a very sort of predictive way to measure not only scale for infrastructure, general compute, things like that, but also on the security side of things. We know kind of basic patterns and what things to look for. In the world of this industry, I think it's turned that for me totally upside down. Constant threats, evolving threats all the time. We definitely have our what we call tentpole events. So think of it as our racing season, NFL, NBA, all of those things where it's just constant. And it's actually a really cool experience to see the way in which we've evolved. Every year we get better and better. Things change, we change along with it. Offering new promos, just, the product itself changing. It's just a constant cycle that you ramp up. All right, now we're ready for the next one. So you just see sort of this curve, right? Just going up and down. And it's great because everyone's always excited and ready for, what are we going to see next? It's probably something new.
So it definitely keeps your team kind of on their toes and flexible.
Absolutely.
So that brings me to AI, right? How's the threat landscape changing with AI, and how are you seeing that kind of reflected in your industry?
I think the entry point to, dare I say, attack is a lot lower. I think, just sort of, again, growing up, coming through the ranks, getting into security, being on the defending side myself, you saw either sophisticated sort of groups or threat actors themselves, or more of what we would call traditionally a script kiddie, right? People that are just playing around, they're testing endpoints. What can I see? Is there any door that's unlocked? And just kind of seeing what they could find. I mean, 10-year-olds now, right, are using Cursor or Windsurf, name ChatGPT or IDE that's helping them. The barrier to entry to, I would say, open or see if those doors are locked is very, very, very low. And as such, we have to be ready for that. I think, independent of our industry itself, just something in security that we have to just anticipate that this will only increase. It's going to get easier and easier for things like code generation or different types of scanning tools, things like that. It's always evolving. We're seeing it now, especially with AI. Just again, the speed is a lot different.
Yeah, and so that brings me to an interesting point of, security vendors have historically been more reactive, even though we have a very noisy marketing speak that confuses everyone. We all sound the same. But in terms of security operations, same thing there, right? It's traditionally been seen as a cost center, not as efficient or effective. How do you see AI changing, and what are you doing in your organization from a security operations standpoint to combat more of the AI attackers?
Yeah, I think for us, we've not only embraced it, but we've used it as sort of a leverage point. Well, if you look at it from the sense of outside in, but also inside out, well, why can't we use AI ourselves? If we know that AI and the type of attacks that are coming from that are going to hit us and the speed at which they can hit us, are we set up for success to be able to react to those things? If not, let's ask ourselves the question. If not, then can we leverage AI against right back? So we've embraced it fully. We actually have a security operations team full of engineers. We have written a lot of our own agentic AI to do what I would say level 1, level 2, sometimes level 3 analyst sort of triage work. And I think this has allowed us to essentially switch from like a queue or pod based model where you might have certain shift work, follow the sun model. There's a myriad of different ones out there. It's allowed us to essentially operate as like a 24/7 shop with not having 30, 40 analysts on a team or having them being shift work where they're responsible for X, Y, and Z tickets that might come in a specific queue. We've opened it up to where we do a lot of the collection and aggregation. We make some decisions, and then we get it to those engineers to actually say, okay, did it get it right? Do I actually need to put eyes on glass? If so, is it something that I can do directly? And maybe something we could talk about sort of the operationalization of those tools on other teams. So I can go pivot and do this myself, or do we hand it off to another engineering team to help us with that?
Interesting. And when you started implementing AI internally, how was your team looking at that, especially the SOC analysts before you transitioned them kind of to more of an engineering mode or no longer have the human SOC analysts?
Right. I think they were curious in a way of like, well, tell me more kind of thing. Right. I'll be honest. I don't think there was ever an inflection point of, well, is this here to replace us? Or is Tyler suggesting, we start adopting an AI type of concept for this type of work? And the goal is to reduce, one, I would say, agentic piece of AI and reduce 5 headcount. I don't think that was ever a conversation, but to be fair, I was very transparent, open, and honest of this is more of an enabler, not something to replace. In a perfect world, I would love it if security engineer on the SOC didn't have to look at a ticket ever. They could focus on, actually building tooling, doing threat detection, some of those automated tasks there. And in a rare case that maybe they do get a ticket, it's more of, oh, well, I see why this actually alerted and generated a ticket. I know what I need to go build from an engineering standpoint so that maybe we do some self-healing or, it doesn't become a ticket in the future.
Cool. And then in terms of LLMs, are you using the models that are out there? What does that look like?
It's a combination.
Only a little bit, or
I can't give you the secret sauce, but we have sort of a combination. So kind of what folks are using today. I think it's fair game to say, we're probably using that as well. But then we've kind of done our own twist on that as well. So we have an LLM that we use internally. We're just scratching the surface on what that looks like. I think that really the possibilities are endless. But just in the few months that we've had this, security aside, it's been great. It's helped with a lot of, I would say, typically manual tasks that we've had to do. We throw it in, it's internal, so we have secure guardrails wrapped around it, and we're just training it as we go.
And then in terms of the agents you've built out for tier one, tier two, tier three, are you at a point where they're speaking to each other, the agents, or is that kind of phase two of what you'll be working on?
Yeah, funny story. What I can share is sort of a funny moment that I had myself of we had written our own piece of agentic AI and we had hooked that up in a Slack channel with one of our vendors. And they had sort of a Slack on their side as well. Not sure if it's agentic AI or just a bot. And at some point, I think we had an alert fire and the bots were just going at it back and forth. And they were sort of in this loop. And it was funny because, you could see sort of the way in which they were trying to go about it. It was one bot was providing on our side was providing the alert with the information from the various sources and ultimately coming up with like a score, right? The bot on the receiving end was like, okay, thank you for submitting this. We're going to open a ticket for that. Well, then our bot interpreted that as a reply, but also, maybe the alert fired again. So they just got into this sort of endless loop back and forth where I don't know how many tickets were actually opened. So we had to make some changes there. But yeah, it was a funny story just to kind of see we invested a lot originally in getting information out faster, but it actually caused a bigger problem. So we sort of had to adjust and we throttled back and changed it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where the human in the loop piece right now is still really mission critical, right? And the more context you give, obviously, the better it gets.
Yeah. So right now we use some of the agentic AI pieces to kind of go out. They look at different systems, something we get an alert or detection fires. We pull some things together. We make a decision based on, is this something that we just want to keep an eye on? Is it going to self-heal? And we essentially just have sort of iterating loops through that. And then ultimately gets to the decision where, okay, a period of time has passed or it's got a high enough score. We actually need to follow our incident or escalation process, page out a human, but that is, kind of taken away the initial, well, I'm on call tonight and I need to sit at my computer and just watch, things happen. Now it's you're on call. Doesn't matter what you do, just bring the laptop with you and be in a place where, if the bot needs to tag you in, it's going to do that.
Because now you're really looking at the outliers that the bot didn't know how to triage, essentially, right?
Correct. You nailed it. So that's where, to me, it's a bonus of having those engineers because like I said earlier, right, if you do get a ticket, why did I get a ticket? What do I need to go build around this? It's also the same principle on what the bot is missing. Oh, okay, great. Well, why did it miss that piece? What do I need to build? Or, what additional piece of data do I need to fit in the pipeline to actually make more of an enrichment to make a better decision on that?
Very cool. And then in terms of the measurement, right? What does good look like? So at Dropzone, we're getting a ton of questions around how are you measuring this? It's so new. What is the effectiveness? SOC has never been measured as being, effective or efficient. So tell me more about that. How are you looking at that? How are you getting buy-in from the executives?
I would disagree a little bit with that statement of, the measurement of it. I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think predominantly it's been measured on ticket volume. How many tickets are coming in and what's the rate in which they're being closed out, right? Less of the fidelity of what's actually coming in or, what's being worked through. So for us, I would say the two main metrics that we have would be just the mean time to detect.
Yeah.
That's obviously rapidly improved because we have the right data points and alerts sort of being fed into the AI. And then the meantime to remediate, astronomical. I don't know the exact numbers, right, to sort of quote you, but I would say it's upwards of like over 60 to 70% increase in efficiency of automated tasks that a human did not have to put their hands on a keyboard and go look at something.
That's great.
So that's on our scorecards. We show that every quarter, and then from there, we kind of have ups and downs depending on if we change a detection or we remove or add a detection. Obviously, that fluctuates, but I would say like MTTD and MTTR are used to really define what good looks like, and then we just map that against our SLAs or SLOs, and that's kind of our output from that.
Interesting. And then it becomes a question of the false positives versus the false negatives as well, right?
Yeah, I would say, for the true positive, benigns or the false positives, those are, full transparency, something that we're always going to have. I think regardless of AI, I think AI will help us get there faster. We're starting to see it on some of the true positive benigns. Case in point is, a detection on our IDP, privilege escalation. We've not seen this before. originally, true positive and have to manual outreach to the user, right? Now it's something like, oh, hey, we see that. We're actually going to go look for a Jira ticket. Did someone actually request this access? Oh, yeah, we found it. Okay, great. Well, it is a true positive. We closed the ticket, right? So that was just sort of that extra layer of enrichment where before a human either had to go directly to that person. Hey, did you have a ticket for this? If it's a threat actor themselves, or, oh, yeah, I have a ticket. So it's just, we're not all the way there yet, but what we have rolled out so far has been very, very beneficial.
It's exciting to see. So then how are you deploying guardrails around AI? I think that's one of the biggest questions in security, right? If you're using AI, what are you doing in terms of security there? How are you level setting the team of what they can and cannot do?
So I think that's part of a two-part question. One would be more team specific. I think the other piece would just be the organization itself. And I think for us, it's a little bit in the same. So we actually are, I would say, a design partner with one of our vendors, and they, without sort of name dropping them, they have an interesting approach where I think the industry is typically focused on more of like the identity and putting guardrails around either the person inputting the prompt or maybe the identity of call it the agentic identity itself. We're starting to look at the opposite, which what I would say is more of the reasoning behind it, right? So if an API is exposing the reasoning pieces of it, well, let's look at adding an additional layer of security there. So we're kind of just trying to explore what that might look like while doing, I would say, the minimum secure guardrails, which are the prompt injection, looking for sensitive data being entered. So we proxy a lot of the traffic there. But for us, it's not about saying no. It's more of go do it. We will support it across the business, but we need to put some of those secure guardrails. So the first piece of it is leverage our internal LLM wherever you can, help make that better. So anything that you ask it, it's obviously, making it better for the next person who comes behind them. And then in some cases where maybe you are going outside, we have ways to sort of filter that and make sure that you aren't shooting yourself in the foot from the standpoint of, leaking information. And we do that through various mechanisms, but we have the ability also to give sort of like that Chat GPT like kind of interface, but it's just skinned, with our brand and product on it, and it still gives that similar user experience. And then I would say like the last one is just around the IDEs itself. So not shutting that down and saying no, we don't have our arms wrapped around this yet. You can't use it, but more of guardrails in the sense of okay, well, code that's generated through AI, we still run that through our same secure pipelines. It still has to get promoted to production the same way it would as if a human read it. So all the checks and balances that we have there still apply to whether a human wrote it or AI.
And then in terms of your peers, I know that in the security industry, you talk to your competitors, you talk to everyone, right? Because the more info you have, the better. And there isn't necessarily a benchmark or always an idea of what good looks like, right? It's more of I think the CISO's mindset is daily survival is kind of the measurement of good, right? We made it another day.
I like it.
So in terms of your peers, how are they thinking about AI? Are they getting on board with it? Do they see the efficiencies it can create and also create a better culture with less burnout? What are you hearing there from your network?
I'm hearing that again, folks are inquisitive. They want to know. They're not necessarily scared of doing it, but I think it's the unknown, right? So, I'm going to say three letters here and people are just like, but MCP, right? Like,
Yep.
fairly emergent. What do we do with that? Can we turn it on? Just so I wouldn't call it like full blown paranoia, but there's so much uncertainty unknown of what potentially could go wrong that I would say what I'm hearing is a lot of hesitancy on it. So for us, we've said like full transparency, we haven't wrapped our arms fully around MCP yet, but that's not, we're not letting stop that. So we apply our same, secure baselines, our secure guardrails around it. And in some cases, we do have certain restrictions based on what a person is trying to do. But we like to think that we've enabled so much that this is sort of like if you're gonna use it, follow these best practices for now while we continue to sort of containerize this thing. So, we're still enabling you to go fast, but not put the business at risk.
Do you find yourself in the minority of companies that have implemented AI and kind of taken that AI first approach and jumped over the friction points and just dove in?
Absolutely. I talk to folks a lot. I have my ear to the ground. I like to see who's doing what, why are they doing it that way, share ideas, those types of things. And I will say that, yeah, there's a lot of folks that just aren't necessarily ready and are amazed at how quick we are able to turn some of these things on, which leads to whole other conversations around like better adopting engineering practices and principles into security. I think you set yourself up for success versus trying to think of it with like a defender mindset. If you switch it, think of it as a builder, you just kind of fold in those secure guardrails or secure by default mechanisms along the way.
That's interesting. I was going to bring that up. Even though you said you're not a developer, I think that's probably the mindset that has you diving in more so than the traditional security kind of started in security, right? Mindset.
I think so. Yeah. But also, I view security as an enabler, right? And it's not just the cheesy way of saying like we enable the business. We do for sure. That's our job. But it's also enabling all of our employees. So the best example I can give you is something like a co-pilot, right? Just general productivity tooling. We owe that to our employees to be able to leverage things like that and make their lives easier, whether it's the product team that wants to write, specs or a briefing on something that they're doing. They should be able to use those things, right? So if you kind of take your security hat off for a second, you take your, kind of engineer or developer brain, and you throw that out the window for a minute and just look at it as like, hey, I want to improve the experience for just general employee base or even myself. Think of it that way. And that kind of, that's what we did. And it sort of set us on the path of, well, let's start very small. Let's start with something like a Copilot or a Chat GPT, get our arms around that, and then work backwards of how can we enable this more and more and more.
Awesome. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit. What is the most unconventional security control you've implemented that actually worked?
Oh, I don't know if I have an answer for that one. That's a really good question. You stumped me.
That will get you into another episode with me once you have that one figured out.
All right. We will come back to that one. That's a really good question.
Awesome. So, the biggest gap that you see today between security tools and actual operational needs?
Yeah, I think this is just an industry problem, right? There's a tool for everything these days. There's an acronym for everything. I don't think everybody talks about this. We've been saying it for years. Just like we say, there's a security talent shortage. We're just not doing much about it, I think. So I think it's very easy for a security team to have a problem that they're trying to solve for.
Mhm.
That might not be an organizational problem. That might be just a security problem. And so it's more of trying to work with, we have really good relationships with various stakeholders throughout the organization. It's less about security, but more of the enablement. And if we're doing it right, we are enabling the business to adapt and change. Well, that could be people, that could be process, that could be technology. And we're right there, sort of, behind the scenes or with them along the way, getting those needs and hopefully, implementing solutions that allow them to continue to do that while giving those guardrails. So how we've been able to do that is a sort of a mix of tooling. Some of it is open source where we contribute. Some of it is just a vendor off the shelf and implementing that. But then others is sort of custom tools that we built ourselves. And in many cases, it's like a shim or some sort of middleware where we're pulling things together to help secure, but also like enable what folks are trying to do.
What's a security decision you made early in your career that you'd handle differently today?
Panic. It's not necessarily a decision, but maybe making decisions out of panic. I think the last probably 5 or so years, I've been kind of like the three C's. I like to call them: the cool, calm, and confident, and just really understanding the risk of what we're actually talking about. So, alert fires. Maybe it's originally a P3, but it looks really bad. I might think it could be a P2, P1. But really, just sort of leveraging our tooling, leveraging our experts, engineers that we have to give that informed opinion. And then ultimately just base that on risk, right? And then from there, just following the plan, right? So it's all about kind of what you asked earlier around the military. It's that operational readiness that's played a giant part in this. The more we pretend things can go wrong and go through those exercises of, how would we handle it, and we have that operational readiness, it's much easier to be kind of calm and just sort of look at the facts and the details and then make a decision based on risk. Early in my career, it was the polar opposite of that. P1, sky's falling, I'm calling everyone, paging entire teams, etc. Also, shout out to AI. It's also helped a lot there as well.
It does help with de-risking too.
It really, really, really does.
Yeah, it's the kind of unbiased voice of reason for the most part, right? And it's really interesting you bring up the human element, because I think so often in our careers early on, we have that initial panic mode sets in. We start scrambling in one direction and later on say, could have done that a little differently, right?
Right.
And as we kind of go through our careers, we realize it's almost like, I'm not a golf player, but I know golf is really mindset for the most part, right? Or like any athlete, it's all about your frame of mind, your ability to think under pressure and act in a way that makes sense and behooves the team and company. And when we talk about these security solutions and alerts firing and we remove alerts and everybody has the next best thing, it's so often forgotten that without the right mindset and the right approach, none of that really matters, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Love that answer. All right, last one. If you could give one piece of actionable advice to security leaders stepping into their first enterprise role, what would it be and why?
Listen to the team. First, people like to time box themselves into like 30, 60, 90s. I'm not a believer in that, but I think that the biggest skill that you can do is just coming in is listen to your team. Really understand what is working well, what's not working well. And then I would say in like a parallel journey is understand the business. So you're only going to be effective security leader if you understand the business. And I understand there's varying degrees and levels to that, but make friends with the product folks and other stakeholders and really understand what's important to them, where they're trying to go. And from there, I think it's a natural sort of segue into, well, you're much better prepared to either build, deploy, buy whatever you're trying to do. If our competitors are already there, why our business is trying to go in that direction, you're more inclined, to be able to meet them all the way, halfway, whatever that compromise is that's appropriate for the organization. But it's starting with the team for sure. They're your eyes and ears. You need to trust them.
Yeah, I always like to say you're only as good as your team.
That's right.
So obviously you're AI forward. You have a really sound approach to people as well as process and security. So I'm sure people will be knocking on your door to learn how you're using AI, what you're doing, what's working, what isn't, so they don't reinvent the wheel. So if so, what's the best place for them to go to find you and connect with you?
LinkedIn, email. I'm not that hard to find. I think we have a goal next year of trying to do more, I would say, publicly facing engineering articles and like your mediums and things like that. So, be on the lookout for that. But I think just if folks have immediate questions, I love this stuff. I'm passionate about security, so I'm an open book to a certain extent. And hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to link up and chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a real blast.
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate your time.